Okay, today we're looking at 2 Samuel 14, the whole chapter. And we were talking about temptation this morning in Sunday school, and I just happened to think temptation is what started this whole thing that we're reading about now. David, who through a long period of conflict with Saul and everything that happened there in 1 Samuel, he attained his kingdom. He attained Jerusalem. He conquered Jerusalem. He brought peace to the whole country, to other countries around him. There was one conflict going on, and during that time is when the catalyst of this whole thing started. But David had ascended to the peak of human endeavor. I mean, he was the king of Israel, and he attained what he was reaching for, and he was in the favor of God. And then temptation came upon him, and he succumbed to it, and he brought Bathsheba to the palace, and then in order to deceive her husband, he sent him out to war and had him killed. And that started all this. And then David, the promise that David was given was that his house would stand and that he would not die because of these sins. But God said that there would be consequences, there would be repercussions, and that's what we're looking at here. Of course, last week we seen where Amnon, the heir apparent and the eldest son, actually raped his sister. Terrible thing. And because of that, she was disgraced and lived. She moved in with Absalom, her other brother, one of her other brothers, and Absalom protected her. And during this time, Absalom was plotting to get revenge on his brother. And when he got the chance to do it, you remember at the sheep shearing, he did. He had his servants to kill him. And because of that, he fled the kingdom and went to Geshur, where he lived for about 2 years. And this chapter goes back and starts talking about Joab again. Of course, we know Joab and his other two brothers. We know Joab was a loyal supporter of David, and he continues to be so here. This scheme he's involved in was not to harm David. It was actually to help save the kingdom. And Joab thought he was doing things right. How many times do people get involved in schemes that they think are going to turn out right, and they don't? You know, they just turn out wrong. And we see that every day. If you look at the news and everything that goes on, you see this all the time. One of the causes of the conflict in nations and families, organizations, is because there's a guy who thinks he can do things better, and he tries to do that. People have different ideas, and they don't always agree with each other. In fact, they don't. And all that started back in the garden and continues forward. So we know that having government is better than not having government, but sometimes government is not good. We know that revenge always brings disaster, but yet people continue to do it. In fact, the most popular scheme you'll see, the most popular theme in movies and TV shows is revenge. You know, people love a good movie where somebody gets harmed and then the hero rises up and gets revenge for them. And it's always praised and glorified, revenge is. And it's a mess, is what it is. So we see schemes here, and this scheme is kind of complicated, but we'll see what we can do with it. So the attempt here was to save the kingdom, and because of that, because we're not perfect people, Joab maybe unintentionally paved the way for even more problems that are coming in the next chapter. So Joab it hurt Joab that Absalom was locked away in another kingdom, somewhere else. He wasn't home. That he knew that David, in fact, it said toward the end of the last chapter that David loved Absalom. It hurt him. And we also can learn some other lessons from this, you know. After Amnon sinned with his sister, David did nothing. He didn't anything. Didn't do anything. He's like a terrible parent. Just didn't do anything. Well, then after Absalom killed him, he still didn't do anything. He didn't condemn it. He didn't make a public statement. He didn't do anything. He grieved about it, you know, like any parent probably would. So we start with verse 1. Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. Verse 1. We knew that Joab knew that David loved Absalom, that he grieved for him. And Zeruiah was David's sister. So Joab is David's nephew. So it's kind of all in the family type thing. You can read in 1 Chronicles 2:16 the fact of that too. So now Absalom was heir to the throne, and his banishment from the kingdom kind of caused some problems. It was a self-banishment. Nobody banished him but himself. But I don't know what would have happened had he not left. But now we know from reading here that Absalom was a popular guy. And it's going to tell us a little bit more about him as we go along. Joab was motivated by love for David, and he wanted to fix things. And Joab sent to Tekoa. Now this is not Tekoa, Georgia. This is the original Tekoa. Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, "Pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. Go to the king and speak thus to him." So Joab put the words in their mouth, verses 2 and 3. So Tekoa is 10 miles south of Jerusalem, and this woman apparently had a reputation for being able to speak well. It says she had a reputation for wisdom. And she is clever with words. You've known people like that. They could talk you into buying something you didn't want. You know, you ever been to we went one time to back when we had even less money than we do now, we wanted to go to Florida, and we seen a clever way to do it was to agree to go on one of these sales tours in order to get free lodging. Well, we got there, the place was gorgeous. I mean, it was the best. And so then we found out where we were staying. It was in an old motel out toward the end of town, kind of a flea-bitten place. So we go to the tour, and we get toured around for about an hour, and it's very nice, you know. And then the pressure starts coming on, you know, the pressure to buy this timeshare. Well, we didn't buy it. In fact, we left that day and didn't go back to the flea-bitten hotel. But we learned a lesson from that, and I think a lot of young people get in the same position. A lot of them buy timeshares. And there's even ads on TV now or on the radio how to get out of a timeshare. Notice they don't tell you how to get your money back. They just tell you how to get out of it. So all that stuff goes on. So you can get sold on things that you don't want sometimes. So this woman was good at that. She was good at, Joab told her what he wanted, and she was good at doing it. So we have a little story here that she talks about with David to get everything going. We know she's pretended, and we know it's Joab's idea. When the woman of Tekoa came to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and paid homage and said, "Save me, O king." And the king said to her, "What's your trouble?" Verses 4 and 5. So this was one of the king's duties. He was kind of a judge. He would settle differences that people would come and bring grievances, and he would settle them. And kings through the ages did this. They were judges also. So Most of the time that people came to the king, they were in some kind of trouble. Alas, I'm a widow, my husband is dead, verses 5. And your servant had 2 sons, and they quarreled with one another in the field. There was no one to separate them, and one struck the other and killed him. So it's kind of reminiscent of Cain and Abel here. One struck the other and killed him. Nobody was there to keep it from happening. And now the whole clan is risen against your servant, and they say, give up the man who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother, whom we killed. And so they would destroy the heir also. Thus they would quench my coal that is left, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth. Verse 7. So this woman's family, the wider family here, clan, was seeking vengeance for the blood of the brother that was killed. And back in Exodus 21:12, you can see the lawfulness of that. People were actually given permission to do this. If someone killed a member of your family and they did it illegally, you could seek them out. It's kind of a self-policing type system. So there's 4 factors here that the woman told the king about that was mitigating. First of all, that the death was not a premeditated murder. It happened in the heat of the moment. And even today, our law reflects that. You know, we can premeditated murder if it's first-degree murder, and the heaviest punishment comes on that. But if you kill somebody in the heat of anger, then that's second-degree murder, or maybe even manslaughter. So God's law here allows mercy in such a case and makes distinction between murder and manslaughter. But the family here, according to the woman, was really not interested in justice. They wanted to get their hands on the inheritance. They would destroy the heir also. And her surviving son was my coal that is left, and the only remaining source of light and warmth in her life. She's saying that her husband's very name and prosperity would be eliminated were her surviving son to die. So this woman was telling Joab's story, and it had been carefully created. Notice that this accidental killing in a quarrel is not a lot different from Absalom killing his brother. You know, Absalom was enraged over this treatment of his sister, so he proceeds to kill his brother. So they're kind of paralleling these stories to make it seem like, or to show the sameness of them. So David told her, go to your house and I will give orders concerning you, verse 8. So in normal circumstances, that would have concluded the whole thing. It would have been done. But what orders was he given? We don't know. Maybe he was taken care of. And then the woman decided to boldly press on. On me be my guilt, on me be the guilt, my lord the king, and on my father's house let the king and his throne be guiltless. Verse 9. So if the king's concerned here, let this guilt be on me if anything's wrong. The king said, if anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall never touch you again. Pretty adamant there. But she didn't think the king and leave. She pressed on. She said, please let the king invoke the Lord your God, that the avenger of blood kill no more, and my son be not destroyed. Verse 11. That's what back in Exodus, the family member was called the avenger of blood, if someone had to go right or wrong like that. It was, at the time, justice was kind of like a Western movie, if you watched them. So, in other words, revenge was actually sanctioned by God in certain ways, but not here. The king, he seemed to be moved by her persistence. He said to her, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Verse 11. So that's the end of the first round of conversation. And then the woman said, please let your servant speak a word to my lord the king. Verse 12. And the woman said, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, insomuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. We must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means, so the banished one will not remain an outcast. Verses 13 and 14. She didn't mention Absalom, but I'm sure David knew who she was talking about. She brought this up. And she's taking a big chance here because he could have just had her killed probably. She basically accused the king of having a double standard, that he would fix her problem but not fix his own. She made 4 points. First, David had planned such a thing against the people of God. She wanted to remind him that the Israelites were the people of God, that he had done wrong to them by doing this, that he had kept the prince away from the people. He brought the Lord your God, she brought the Lord your God into the conversation, and basically implied that it was more serious than just her own family troubles. So Joab here may have seen the possibility of a civil war if this thing wasn't corrected. Notice too the similarity between this. She said, for in giving this decision, the king convicts himself. Kind of like Nathan saying, you're the man. You're the man, when the man took the little lamb, remember that? Nathan accusing David of those crimes. So the king does not bring his banished one home again, verses 13. So without uttering Absalom's name, she basically put it out there what she was talking about. And she described Absalom as the king's banished one, and puts the responsibility of Absalom being off in Geshur for 3 years on David, even though he left voluntarily and fled. But I'm sure that the border guards probably had orders not to let him back in. And David had done absolutely nothing. Just the very picture of a bad parent here. He'd done nothing. Sometimes you take action and it's wrong, but even that action's better than no action at all. And then she reminded him that we must all die, that death is irreversible like water spilled on the ground. In other words, Amnon is dead. There's nothing we can do about it now. Let's go on with life. Let's bring Absalom back, put him back in the family. That it's generally true that when somebody's dead, they're dead. There's nothing else you can do about it. And she was reminding the king of his own experience of the son that died after Bathsheba had the baby. Remember, the baby died, and he laid on the ground, didn't eat until he died, and then he got up and went on with his life and basically said that God's took him, there's nothing else I can do about it. So she's kind of taking this situation here. Now I've come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid, and your servant thought, I will speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. For the king will hear and deliver his servant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my son together from the heritage of God. And your servant thought, the word of my lord the king will set me at rest. For my lord the king is like the angel of God to discern good and evil. The Lord your God be with you. Verses 15 through 17. So she kind of wraps up here with a little bit of flattery, The Lord, my Lord the king is like the angel of God to discern good and evil. You're just really good at doing this. And if you can see the evil that's coming against me, you can see the evil that you're doing too. Kind of like giving him the way to convict himself. So the whole purpose of this was to get the king to see the error of his ways. We don't know that Joab hadn't tried before in some different way to get Absalom back, but here he's using this woman to do it, and she is good, isn't she? I mean, she really can deliver a manipulative type speech. So here we see David coming back at her. The king answered the woman, "Do not hide from me anything I ask you." And the woman said, "Let my lord the king speak." The king said, "Is the hand of Joab with you in all this?" David already figured out she wasn't doing this on her own. The woman answered and said, "As surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn to the right hand or the left from anything that my lord the king has said. It was your servant Joab who commanded me. It was he who put all these words in my mouth of your servant. In order to change the course of things, your servant Joab did this. But my Lord has wisdom like the wisdom of the angel of God to know that all things are on the earth." Once again, she comes back and flatters him a little bit more. But admitting what's going on, she's admitting it. She's flattery all over. And David knew what Joab's viewpoint was anyway. I think he'd seen this before. In order to change the course of things is what the reason here was for. So we can imagine here the woman leaving and then Joab coming in. The king didn't express any displeasure in Joab. On the contrary, then the king said to Joab, "Behold now, I grant this. Go, bring back the young man Absalom." Go get him, bring him back. I don't think David was really forgiving of him, that his heart did grieve for him, but he was willing to do this. And Joab fell on his face to the ground and paid homage and blessed the king. And Joab said, "Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, and that the king has granted the request of his servant." Verses 22. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. Verse 23. So here Joab thinks everything's going to be fine now. I brought him back. I'm going to take him in, put him back in his family. Everything will be forgiven. But the king said, "Let him dwell apart in his own house. He is not to come into my presence." Literally here, my face he won't see. I'm not going to speak to him. I'm not going to have anything to do with him. You can bring him back in the country. I know he's a popular guy and the people will like it, but I'm not going to have anything to do with it. So Absalom lived apart in his own house. So here we have a messy situation. It's just getting messier. And we're going to see as we go along that it's going to get a lot more messy. Once again, David's avoiding the responsibility that he had toward his child. I mean, Absalom is a grown man, but David's still his father. He's not dealing with him. He's not talking to him. He's not trying to resolve a situation. He could have went and had a talk with him and thrown him in prison for a while or something like that, done something to him to resolve this situation, but he didn't do it. Or he could have just said, "I forgive you." He had that power. So now we go back to Absalom. Now Absalom, we haven't heard a lot about him up to now. We know that he loved his sister. He protected his sister. We know that he had honor in some ways. And we have a closer look at him here. Now in all Israel there was no one so much to be praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. Kind of reminds you of another handsome guy who got into trouble, don't it? Saul. Remember how Saul was tall and better looking than anybody else in Israel? He was a very accomplished basketball player looking guy. Well, Absalom was more like, you remember that guy? I can't remember his name now. It used to be in the books. Had the long flowing hair and the big muscles and all the women. They wrote all these ladies